I've started the recording, and now I'm going to admit all the attendees.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. This is considering power dynamic position as an essential part of the seating system. My name is Philip Correa. I will be moderating today's session, and I will provide the CU code at the end of the presentation. Before we get started, please remember to mute yourself. Questions can be asked using the chat feature. Now we'll go ahead and turn it over to Stephanie Tanguay and Kathy Fisher. Welcome and good luck.
Thanks, Philippe. How are you today?
Very good.
Everybody, thanks for joining us. We seem to be missing Stephanie at the moment, but I'm going to continue on. So just to give you a quick little introduction to who I am, my name is Kathy Fisher. I am the clinical educator for Invacare Canada. My background is I'm an occupational therapist. I worked on the vendor or provider side of the business for many, many years, doing complex positioning and complex power chairs and that sort of thing, which is where my interest lies. I moved over to Invacare about 5 years ago as the clinical educator, and as such have continued on to follow the development of technology, both in power chairs, seating, and such. Stephanie, my colleague, is the clinical educator for Matrix products across the United States. And together we have done a number of interesting and exciting projects together, developing some products, working with clients to enhance their technology. So when we were putting together this presentation, I think what we both really wanted to say to people was, you know, you can't just think of seating or power wheelchairs in isolation. We need to think about the entire system as being a system and as working together with pieces that that will incorporate technology and really look at people's function, how they're functioning in their environment and what they're doing with their equipment, not just looking at seating in isolation. Okay, so we're going to talk about the assessment. We're going to talk about the role that power positioning plays in the seating system itself. We know that before we start anything, we have to have a foundation for someone to be positioned. So it starts with the seat and the back, and we work from there. So we get somebody positioned, we get them comfortable, we get them stable so that they can go on to function. And if anybody was in Karen Kangus's session yesterday, we know that seating isn't designed to be static. We know that seating needs to move with the person and allow the person to move. Clients aren't sitting still for long periods of time. We want them to be in their equipment and moving around and doing functional activities. But there are many choices. So those choices, you know, lots of different manufacturers have developed wonderful products in this industry. Stephanie working for Motion Concepts and myself working for Invacare and Motion Concepts, we're limited to our access to products. So we will show you many of the examples that we have are Invacare or Motion Concepts products, but that's not to say that there aren't other things out there. That's what we have access to. So I would ask you to do your own, do your own due diligence and take a look at what's out there that may offer something for your clients, but really try and understand what what are the features of each of those products and how does that benefit or limit your clients, and really understanding the differences between those products. The one thing that we can't do is we can't ever think about a seating system without a thorough assessment. And I think that that's something, it's been a challenge through COVID times because we're not always in the same room with our clients. But if we don't do that, we're really doing our clients a disservice. So we need to understand the client's position and their need to function, their movement, and how they will translate that movement into what they're doing, whether it be driving a power chair, whether it be sitting at their desk and accessing their computer, whether it be driving a vehicle. So we need to think of that seating, not just as we sit together in a clinic and somebody's not moving, but as we think about somebody driving a power chair down a very rough, bumpy road. You know, again, what are the forces throwing that person around and how are they maintaining their position? Again, when we're starting to talk about power positioning, what is the effect of changing position on your position, whether it be your relationship with the joystick, your relationship to whatever driver control. And again, thinking about the impact of that movement on the client's postural and postural situation. Okay, and we need to think about the benefits and the limitations of postural change and power dynamic seating, and how that will benefit the person, how they're going to interact with it, and how, you know, again, how they understand how to use those functions to their benefit. And again, I'm not going to go through all the goals of seating. We've talked about this you know, for many, many years, but I think what we really want to talk about is how are these things affected by power positioning. Okay, it gets really interesting and complicated when things start moving. So again, we need to be aware of all these things and the benefits of powered seating. But again, thinking about the introduction of shear forces when we add recline. And when we see Stephanie, hopefully she'll join in and talk to us about, you know, that the implications of shear and of friction and those types of things. Again, we need to think about the design of our products and how they are designed to be used. And again, if we're looking at multiple positions, how are those, you know, how are those forces being translated as somebody moves, and how are we managing, again, skin and posture. I've always said that pelvic stability, you know, again, is achieved in 3 ways. It's achieved by having a seat to provide a stable base, to control the pelvis and keep the pelvis from sliding, a back support to come in and position the pelvis from behind and hold that PSIS and bring the pelvis up into neutral as much as we can. And then the positioning belt, which gives that extra bit of stability to allow someone not to restrict their movement, but to allow their movement to happen, but yet keep them in a stable position so that, like I say, they can access their driver control. They can stay in position so that they're not sliding on the cushion to a point of sitting on some contour that there is not designed to be sat on. So again, we need to think about that stability and how we're going to achieve it, especially when we start talking about movement and power positioning. But we know that seating isn't always enough. Okay, we know that bodies are built to move. They're designed to, we're designed to move. We need to rotate in order to achieve movement. So we need to not restrict somebody's movement, but allow that functional movement to happen. This is my little friend Asha, and I know this isn't a pediatric presentation, but it's such a good illustration, and she's such a sweetheart that I often use her to start the discussion. And if you look at this cute little picture of her, you know, she's got her hand on her chin. It looks like she's at a photo shoot. In fact, what's really happening is she can't hold her head up for long periods of time. She's a young lady with spinal muscular atrophy. And often we don't talk about power positioning when we're looking at little kids because we don't think they have enough cognitive ability or the ability to be able to understand when they change their position. But this is a smart young lady who knows exactly where she needs to be in order to function. So you can see, again, you know, we think about growth. And again, Karen said yesterday, if you're building a system to grow, it's not going to ever benefit you until everything is in that right position. We see that in the adult population. We see clients being discharged from facilities, and sometimes, you know, we have people who come up with the concept that, well, maybe they're going to put on weight after their injury. You know, we don't know what's going to happen. So we're going to build the seating system a little bit too big so there's room for them to grow. But what that does is sacrifice the positioning that we have for that client right now in the here and now, where they can't, you know, they're not stable enough to be able to maximize their function. So again, we need to think about the seating and the power positioning as one system, and how does somebody move and how do you provide that stability for them to be able to move. So before we go any further, again, we want to clarify the term dynamic. Okay. And the reason I do that is because I get a lot of people asking for things that are dynamic, but they're related to a specific product name, or something that doesn't generally just mean what we're talking about, which is movement. Okay. So if we look up in the dictionary, what is dynamic? It's a noun, the force that stimulates change. Okay. So today we're not talking about a 20-degree tilt manual wheelchair that pivots at the knee and allows someone to maintain their feet on the floor. We're not talking about vibration dampening systems, okay? We're not talking about polymers or springs at this point. We're not limiting movement to be in any one plane. So we're not just talking today about posterior tilt. We're talking about movement in multiple planes, again, to look at where does somebody need relief of pressure? Where does somebody need a change in position in order to stay in an upright, aligned position? We're focusing on seat functions that facilitate independent position so that the client can be in multiple environments doing multiple different activities. Okay, so that's our goal for today. We know that gravity influences everything. Okay, I always said it would be great to do seating on the moon, but we would have to get some strapping involved. Okay, it's a challenge because gravity is always acting and pulling us down into flexion. So if we're looking at seating in a static position, again, you can look at Mr. Skeleton here, gravity is pulling his head down. And as we know, heads get heavier as they come more forward. So if we can use gravity as much as we can to our advantage to allow somebody to get some spinal extension, get their head back, change the pressure, keep their pelvis back in a stable position, then they have more freedom to be able to use their upper extremities for functional activities. So moving toward the concept of power positioning, again, we want to think about, like everything in this business, their benefits and limitations. And we need to understand that when we change one thing, all sorts of other things change. Okay, so we have to establish what the priorities are and try and understand what the best thing for this client would be. And again, understanding what their priority is. We need to think about their physical condition in the present and the future. You know, I know that our crystal balls don't work very well. Mine certainly it's a bit foggy. We don't always know what's going to happen, but we're trying to plan with the knowledge that we have what changes might occur as somebody is living and aging with their disability. We need to think about functional abilities, and those change over time. So again, you know, what can we do? You know, if we've got someone with a progressive neurological condition, we're expecting function to change maybe for the negative. And in those situations, we may want to give somebody more opportunity to change their position early on in their development through their disability. So for example, you know, clients with muscular dystrophy who get to the point where they cannot move are very scared of movement and very scared of losing their head position. So if on our first prescription of a power chair, we introduce the concept of power tilt and power mobility, powered seating, then we give somebody the ability to understand how to use it, how it benefits them, how they can move with it. So at the point where they can't move at all, it's not terrifying to introduce it. Okay. So again, we also need to look at who's using the chair and how are they interacting with the chair, the caregivers, the clients. What is their, I always say, technology tolerance. You know, again, I worked with a woman who was, she had severe arthritis. Tilt, recline, changing her leg position would have given her some relief at all of the joints. But she said, you know, I'm just too old to figure all of this out and remember, when do I use one thing versus another? So she said, you know, I understand that you're telling me this is going to be a benefit, but if I'm not going to use it, I don't want it. So we have to be sensitive and aware of who's working with the client. And maybe we need to add those features over time. Maybe that's a funding thing as well. So again, are we looking at modular components that can be added in the future? And again, we want to give clients that independence. So when I was talking about my little girl, Asha, again, you know, she was only 4 when we prescribed her first power chair. But she understood when she was tired in her head, she was trying to hold her head out, she understood that she could change her position. Okay, so again, working with someone early and giving them that independence translates for a longer period of time and giving them the freedom that they're not always depending on someone. You know, if you're a little 4-year-old at school, asking your teacher or your, you know, educational assistant to move your position because you need to be able to do something, you might be afraid to ask that question, or you may not have the voice output to be able to, you know, get someone to understand you. So I think we need to make sure that we give people the benefits that they need and not be afraid to introduce concepts to people, even if maybe they don't want to take that. And I think, you know, again, when I talk about this subject, I think, unfortunately, sometimes our therapists are afraid that people will see this as not a basic and essential component, and not feel that justifying powered positioning features is really an integral part of the seating and part of that whole system and part of somebody's independence to be able to do the activities they need to do. So again, once we've done our seating assessment, and we've looked at the function of our client, and we've decided, again, with the client, you know, the whole team, you know, we're thinking the client would benefit from this because how do we put all of these pieces of this giant puzzle together? Okay, we need to think about, when I tilt back, can I maintain my hand on the joystick? When I recline a little bit further, can I still reach the switch that allows me to come back up? And maybe I need a backup switch for that. So we can't think of any of the pieces in isolation. We need to think of them as a system. And with some of these complex clients, how do you try things? You know, how do you try something that's custom? Again, you can see we come up with ways to do this. So again, you know, when we're thinking of lateral tilt, that it might be a benefit, you know, look at that client seating. It's very complex. We can't just get a demo. It's not going to be right. We know if the seating doesn't match the client and hold them and support them, that they won't be able to interact with it. So again, sometimes we have to take a bit of a leap of faith to say, we're pretty sure this is going to work. We're going to get the funding. We're going to get this piece of equipment. And we're going to get the client in it when they have the proper supports to be able to understand that function. Okay, this just recently happened with me. I'm working with a lady who is in her 70s. She's a lovely lady with cerebral palsy. She has very limited communication. So she's very hard to understand, but man, she drives with a head array, and she's been driving for a long time. And as we started talking about introducing power tilt and a new head array, she really wanted to try it. And we said, you know, we're not going to maybe have the best outcome, and we're concerned that maybe we're going to make it worse for you, because if you have a negative experience with it, are you going to want to go through with this? And unfortunately, we had some challenges. We didn't have her custom seating. She wasn't seated very well, but we were able to give her the concept of driving with a proportional head array versus a digital head array, even though it wasn't perfect. And, you know, we really had to work with her to understand that. So again, we need to be realistic, and what kind of trial can we expect with these complex clients? So moving into what's available. And I think it's really important to understand, what are the choices, okay? What's out there? And some of what we wanted to talk to you today, we can't bring everything to you in an hour. We have all kinds of things that we've created, from custom systems to multiple things. So we tried to kind of hit some of the highlights. And if you're interested, we can do a follow-up to this presentation, or we can certainly send you some information on what's available. But again, one of the biggest things is to think about, you know, again, when do you introduce power positioning? Again, these are some of the benefits here of power tilt. I'm not going to go through each of these points, except to say I'd really like to introduce Chris to you. This is Chris, and Chris is, unfortunately, he's kind of a sad story, because when I met Chris, he had been sitting in this power chair for 6 years. Okay. When I met him, I didn't have any information other than that I was coming to work with the provider and the therapist to get him a new chair and to do custom seating. So all I knew is that we had custom seating involved. Okay. When I got there, I didn't know his diagnosis. I didn't know anything. And when I first laid eyes on Chris, like you are right now, I looked at him and thought, he probably has some kind of a progressive neuromuscular condition. Looking at the rotation, looking at the fact that he's vented. And as we started to talk, he is a C5-6 quad, which is, again, not what I expected. And this was a situation where he got a chair. The therapist was concerned about power tilt because she was unfamiliar with the justification. And she thought, okay, we'll get him a basic chair, we'll get him seating, and then, we'll add those pieces later. Well, unfortunately, 6 years later, sitting in planar seating in a static position, look at him, he's holding on for dear life. He's holding on to his joystick to keep himself stable. And that big wide chest support is really what's keeping him in position. He's rotated himself. His mother made him little supports that they would stuff in around him because he was so uncomfortable. But he's not a guy that wants to ask for help or go out of his way. He just sort of thought, I'll live with this chair until I get a new one, until I'm ready for a new one, which is really a shame. Again, you have to look at the person out of their chair. So this is my friend Gloria, who is the therapist we were working with. We were able to, in his home, he had a change table. We were able to get him on this change table and really start to look at what's really going on with him. Obviously, we see there's a pelvic obliquity. We see there's certainly a pelvic rotation going on, but is it as dramatic as it was when we looked at him sitting in his chair? And then we got him into the molding frame to try and look at how are we going to do the custom seating? Because again, look at his positioning. He's having to strain his neck when he drives to see forward. Again, like I said, he's holding on to the joystick, not just to drive, but to hold himself in position. So what we did is we allowed his pelvis to rotate. We got his trunk in a good position so that he could see where he was going. He could breathe better. And then we wanted to give him the ability to change his position. Okay, take the pressure off. Now, again, like I said, there's no perfect trial. We didn't have his custom seating yet, but he wanted to understand what tilt felt like because he was afraid of it. So here we are, in his driveway, setting up a chair. How do we hold him in the chair? We wrapped a seatbelt around him. We stick a towel in there. There's Kleenex boxes under his feet. So it's not ideal, but it was enough for him to see what happened when he went back and forth in tilt. Okay. And for him, he was asking to be able, he said he couldn't reach the buttons in his elevator, which in my mind is a basic and essential function for him to be able to live in his house. So what we saw as he changed his position is, again, his hand would fall off the joystick. So it was enough to tell us, what did we need to do? We needed custom seating. How are we going to interface that with the tilt system? And how are we going to maintain his arm on the joystick? How could we provide some custom support so that he never was in a situation where his hand would fall off and he would be stranded? So again, sometimes positioning for functional activity, does it go beyond basic? Whose idea is this concept of basic and essential? And you have to look at what's basic and essential for this person. And I think creating an environment for him where he couldn't shift his weight. I don't know how he didn't develop any skin issues given the obliquity that he had and the flatness of the cushion he was sitting on. So again, we can't undo what happened in the past, but certainly we've been able to do that. We're able to do that now moving forward. All right, so I'm going to hand this over to Stephanie. Oh, I think you're muted, Steph.
How's that? Better.
That's much better.
Actually, one of the, and I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, one of the things I love about that, about the comparison of him in his chair with all that rotation, and when you have him in the molding frame, is he's not holding on for dear life in the molding frame. Like, look at how more, his right hand is more relaxed. It can move into his lap. Like, it's just, he was gaining so much support with the seating.
Mhm.
you know, really incredible. So anyway, so all right. So now, so that's looking at tilt. How about with recline? And you know, again, like you know, we're trying to put all these pieces together to make sure everything's going to work together. You have to really think about how the opening of the seat to back angle that is going to be experienced with recline is what are the ramifications? Is everything still going to work the same? Is it going to stay in the same orientation? So there's a lot of things to consider. Some people, you know, it's so much more common now to see tilt and recline systems being prescribed. And I think that people just think like the more the better, but it's not always the case. So and a great way, if we look at the next slide, a great way to really kind of exemplify this. There's such fantastic research that we have available, both with the Resna position papers on tilt recline and power elevating leg rests, and great research that's shown us the true benefits of being able to, you know, a minimum of tilt with like 35 degrees of tilt as we see here, with 120 degrees of recline, and then the duration of time of 3 minutes or so that can really help to maintain good skin perfusion and keep oxygenated blood flowing well. But again, it's like, how are all these dynamic things going to actually work together or not? So if we take a look at the next slide, I took these pictures so many years ago, but still one of my greatest examples of when we really don't think things all the way through. This was a young girl when I met her, only about 12 years of age. But she had been using this system with tilt and recline for more than 5 years when I met her. So this, I know, was a system that would have never been available in a true pediatric size. And you can see that here they're using a planar seating system this is through Freedom Designs. It's all mounted anterior of the back posts, pretty significantly. If you really think about the orientation point for where our recline would actually be moving from, is actually right about, I don't know if I've got access to a little pointer or not, but it's going to be about 3 inches or so. Thank you, Kathy. So the pivot point is going to be a little bit farther back than that, and right close to the top of the cushion. But the problem is that the mounting hardware, the thickness of this back altogether, all of this is mounted significantly anterior of the pivot point of the recline. There's 2 great ways we can always mess up reduced shear with recline. One is having backs too far forward, and one is having seat cushions too high, raised up above the pivot point. And so if I'll call out just a few areas where you really want to watch here is the lateral moves up. This picture on the left, you can see where the lateral, it's only that back is actually truly only opened about 35 or 40 degrees, but you can see that the top aspect of the lateral is already well up into her axillary area. And as you look at the picture on your right, as she's moved into what is full recline for her, the laterals are actually up above her shoulders. Her head is no longer even in the vicinity of the head support in this chair. And because everything is so far forward, it really does pull her into an incredibly hyperlordosed orientation. So there's all this shearing displacement of these positioning components moving against her body, the back itself moving against her skin on the back. And you know, what would happen if she's using a midline mounted joystick? What would happen when we have somebody using a head control, a chin control, something like that? We can't allow this type of displacement. Just totally undermines the functionality of controls. So let's go ahead and look at the next. This is just another example of a planar back that was added onto a recline system, and this happened to be an example in working with a provider who I don't think had ever used probably didn't have a lot of experience with planar seating, but but hadn't thought about recessing in between the back canes or ordering the back with rail cuts so it would allow you to recess. And so everything is anterior of the back interface mount, and it's all anterior of the back canes. And look at the step. So we don't pull people over that. It ends up with this lower aspect. Everything above the seat cushion is basically, we've created this big block that jams up against the sacrum, holds somebody there, and would pull you into, again, a completely hyperlordotic orientation. So things are moving against our skin, bad. And for our skin integrity, bad for all of the positioning things we're trying to have, or the controls that we're trying to maintain. So it's really about, you have to understand and be aware of, with moving parts and interfacing things, where are they all going to end up? And you should certainly be trying that out, rather than just send somebody home with something like that. So thank you. So there's a great example of a recessed interface. If you've not ever done this, so this would, a typical, like a recess rail cuts might, where you're determining how far inboard from the edge, and how far the depth that you want to go back. And I know in my younger days, like, I would have always thought about doing rail cuts like this on a back that was being mounted into a manual tilting system, or a power tilting only system. But nowadays we see so many requests to do this in recline. So again, we have to make sure that we are having the minimum amount of material anterior of the pivot point to really make this work. This particular diagram, different manufacturers would do this in different ways. But you have to really understand all of the measurements for how far you need to have something mounted inboard from the edge. If you want foam in front of the back cane, or the glide blocks in this example, and these are the types of schematics, if you ask the right questions, it's very easy to work with the manufacturer, or should be easy to work with the manufacturer to problem solve around this, and make sure that all these pieces are going to come together properly, and give you the best outcome for your consumer. Okay. So how all of this is going to mount in together, I know we don't really, Kathy and I, even for all the things I searched through, I don't really have a great example. This is this happens to be like a silhouette molded cushion in a matrix shell. This is only mounted in a power tilt system, but you would still be able to do this into like a recline mechanism. There's different ways of mounting different off-the-shelf shells to different manufacturers' pieces. A lot of times we still might be using pre-drilled out interfacing plates or things like this, and again, into a recessed, and keeping things as thin and narrow, not adding big, huge, puffy things. So just having the amount of foam and padding that you really need to capture the shape and to distribute the weight, and not creating more problems.
So this is Sydney, and as we talk about how do we mount things, so Sydney is a young lady with spinal muscular atrophy. She has rods in her back, so she's had spinal instrumentation. But as we know, backs don't come out perfectly symmetrical. So you'll see in the pictures that come, you'll see her obliquity. She does definitely have some asymmetry in her back, but the one thing for her is she has to be in exactly the right position in order to balance her head. Okay, so she's got great sitting tolerance. Her skin has been good. When we did her new system, I never mess with something that's working. She's been sitting on a Rojo cushion that's working. That's fine. She's comfortable with it. And I know it's sort of counterintuitive in that we're talking about providing stability, but we were able to do that through her back support and through her position change. So you can see here, she has a position where she can come forward. That's the position where she can balance her head. She was going off to school, so she's a student, so she was going to spend all day in her chair, working at her desk, looking at a computer, doing all of those things, not remembering to change her position and all the things we tell our clients that they should be doing. But for her, what I wanted to be able to do was give her a position where she could be supported even in that forward position where she liked to work. So that position of action where she could work. So what we did for her is not only give her recline so that she could open her hip angle and take a break and redistribute the pressure. She could tilt again. You know, if she's going up or down an incline, for example, you know, it's very important for her to be in the right position so she doesn't lose her head position. And then we gave her precline. So this system will go 8 degrees forward of 90 degrees. So basically like the little icon at the top shows, coming forward of 90 degrees, really to give her a system that she could lean back against and that would give her support when she was in that functional position. Now, in terms of the mounting, because Stephanie was talking about how important it is to mount, again, you can see we mounted the matrix shell, which is designed to work with the recline system. So it drops into the system. And again, I pulled it back between the back canes. Now we're limited, obviously, because there's a lot of hardware. There's the recline system. And I tried to give you a couple of different views there so that you can see what stops us from getting back in a recline system. But again, you know, we wanted her to be able to move forward and back without having a lot of displacement because the back is quite contoured. Okay, so again, it matches her asymmetries. The other thing is the edge of the back kind of blocks her arms from falling back so she doesn't lose her arm position. So again, it was very important to try and get her as close to that pivot point between her hip joint and the pivot point of the chair in order to, again, be able to move through her recline position without everything coming out of position. Now for her, she's not one of these clients that goes out into a full laying position. She actually doesn't have the range in her hips to lay flat. But for her, even going 5 degrees of recline takes the pressure off and allows her to be able to redistribute the pressure, giving her a break to her hips and her lower spine. Again, just to give her some relief. So from a basic and essential point of view, it allows her to be up in her chair all day long without a caregiver being present as she goes to school and does all of her, you know, 20-something girl activities. So shifting gears and moving forward.
I love that. So there are a couple different products that are on the market now that are giving, you know, really looking at giving consumers access to things that are in, you know, moving closer to what's in front of them, to workstations, counters, things of that nature. So we've had things that had some degree of anterior tilt, some nice things on the market that can actually give us anterior tilt and bring our foot platforms closer or right onto the ground rather than having to try to manage lower extremities and swing them out of the way for transfers. So it's really been fascinating to kind of watch this aspect of dynamic repositioning kind of take off, I think, for me in the last decade or so, that we've really seen some nice stuff. So anterior orientation, there's a lot of things that we think of with slight anterior tilt or anterior orientation. So we're going to look at a couple of different examples of how this might have an impact for somebody. So one would be, I think it was Rich. And so this is a gentleman who has multiple sclerosis, requiring powered mobility, still able to do a really scary for this OT transfer. Loved the ability of using traditional posterior tilt because it really let him get himself all the way back in the chair he couldn't scoot as much as he had once been able to. But the anterior tilt that you see that occurs with this system, this really let him come forward for functional activities. So whether it was getting set up for a transfer, pulling up closer to a table, or a workstation, where sometimes we would have some fairly high seat to floor heights with this type of technology. This is an older system. Dropping down a little bit more in the front, let him get his knees underneath a table at the house. He had a little work desk area set up for himself at home that he was able to access his computer. And then in the next slide, you'll see, again, scary transfer for me, but it really let him have the ability to be forward. And now we even have systems that not only can come forward, but can actually start to lift up a little bit, almost like a lift chair that you might see an elderly consumer utilize in their home. And so that was, as you know, we have some consumers that have conditions where they might be, their strength might fluctuate throughout the course of a day, or they may be losing some of their functional capabilities because of their disease process. That this type of changed orientation can really, it was the difference of him being able to be home for big periods of time during the day when his wife was still able to work versus needing round the clock care. So it wasn't pretty, but it actually was pretty functional for him. So, and then of course in the next picture we'll see him in the he was still able to drive, and so accessing the driver's cockpit. So we're looking, you know, always with these types of things, we have to be so cognizant, as I said, about the seat to floor height, head clearance in the cockpit, but he's able to pull forward and get a little bit of drop, really make sure he doesn't have any interference with the handbrake or any of the hand controls in his van. And he's got perfect orientation for the windshield view. So, you know, this really was a game changer for him, as opposed to other systems that he had been considering for wheel mobility. So it really made a huge world of difference. Now that situation is very, very different from this one that I want to talk about next. So this is Coach Rob Mendez. And I've had the privilege of being able to work with a team of people at our company trying to come up with some great new mobility solutions for Rob over the last year. He is a high school football coach, and you see just a couple of quick pictures of a newer system that we provided for him last year. So I would not ordinarily, my OT brain would not have really thought about the idea of anterior tilt being really a good idea for somebody that does not have even the smallest amount of residual limbs on lower extremities. He was a congenital quad amputee, basically, and so from a balance point stand, I would not have. I was really surprised in getting a chance to meet him and kind of see him and his ability to move. So if we look at his next picture. This is the picture that you see on the left is Rob in his previous system, which was a chair that he'd been using for 11 years at that point. And he has the physical ability to pivot forward on to his more anterior aspect of his ischial tuberosities. His older chair that he had been using for all this time has a little bit of a pre-tilt to it. So we've always kind of, you know, I was kind of born and raised in that generation where we always thought about even level can feel very disorienting and very anteriorly unstable to a lot of people. And so 5 degrees of pre-tilt is one way that we traditionally think of as keeping the pelvis keeping the consumer rearward in the orientation of their cushion and in their seating system. But for Rob, this is really about his ability, his fine point of being able to physically move himself anterior, posterior, pivoting over his ischial tuberosities. So on the right, you see a side view of him. This is in a molded system that we had done as a foam in place to do a shape capture. But this is mocked up on a rear wheel drive chair that you saw him on the football field in. And this system has 5 degrees of anterior tilt, as well as traditional posterior tilt, some recline, and a 12-inch seat elevate system. So it really gives him an amazing amount of orientation to change his position, his orientation for, to really maximize his ability to move his body in relation to his mobility device. So when Karen Kangas was saying about how dynamic all things are, you know, none of us sit statically, and that's sure Rob's case. So if you look at the next picture, you can really even see with a system that is some degree of shape captured stability in the seat, you can still see that he's able to be in a slightly neutral or posterior position, and he can move himself into a very anterior, really extend and really hyperextend his back and kind of stretch. And this really is significant. He has, you know, a lot of our consumers that are sitting for, you know, hours and hours a day, you know, end up with a lot of pain issues, and his sensation is all intact. So, you know, we wanted to really be able to preserve this. So really looking forward next week. So the timing was just a little off, but next week, what you see on the right here is a brand new Aviva Storm RX that we'll be delivering to Coach. So this system has 10 degrees of anterior tilt, as well as some great power, like very customized power actuated devices for accessories like a tablet and a phone holder. So really looking forward to being able to do that and get some finished pictures. So, but I would not have thought about, I just know it's like, you know, you never want to be so old that I think I'm always like, I know best. It's like when I saw him move into 5 degrees of anterior tilt and how it changed, and really to be able to see and feel how that changed in the deep back musculature. It was amazing. So it's like, never say never.
Yeah, we learn, you know, with kids with cerebral palsy stuff that, you know, a little bit of anterior tilt can't stay there all day, but it forces, it really gets that extension going and changes their position. And
absolutely.
I know for me, sitting at home where I haven't been for many years, working all day long, it sure makes a difference when you can have a little bit of anterior and posterior tilt in your chair to sit all day.
Absolutely.
And we're able-bodied.
Exactly.
So switching planes, then there's the concept of lateral tilt. And again, you know, we've talked about the benefits of going forward and back and using gravity as your friend as opposed to your enemy. Lateral tilt really comes into play, and I've worked with quite a number of clients with lateral tilt. I will tell you, they have all been either clients with congenital muscular dystrophy or spinal muscular atrophy. I have only worked with one client with cerebral palsy with lateral tilt, but I had a good outcome with that as well. So the concept of lateral tilt is allowing that pressure redistribution, not only, you know, in the anterior posterior plane, but in that lateral plane. Again, when we look at clients that are getting that collapse, and I think the next slide will show you that, you know, how do you manage a situation? We have clients that are so scoliotic that their lower rib almost sits right on top of the ASIS, and you get skin breakdown there, not to mention pain. So how do we unweight that? Or in the case of my client here, this is Megan. It's an old picture of Megan. I actually had a Zoom call with Megan the other day. She's a young lady who's done remarkably well. She's working for one of the large banks. She's really happy to be working at home, as we have tons and tons of snow to deal with here. But that lateral tilt allows her the ability to work at her desk all day, change her position. And what was happening is the way she drives, she almost has her arm sitting on her midline control, allowing her to drive. And she kind of sits like this with that forward head position. And she was getting tremendous pain in her shoulder and in her neck. And that's what actually got us going. This was the first lateral tilt that I did. The other thing is, from a functional point of view, she has a special skills dog, and allowed her to be able to connect his leash to her, which, you know, is attached to her chair. So again, it was one of those things. It gave her a lot of physical benefits of pressure redistribution, but it also gave her a lot of functional independence. And Stephanie, I'll let you talk about this client.
Yeah, I don't want to, this is just a little case study from my friend Kim Davis, who's a physical therapist, but probably one of certainly the most laterally collapsed consumers that I had ever seen. And I remember when we first spoke about this, and Kim was telling me about this young woman that was in their clinic with her head literally on the armrest in a manual chair. So there were a lot of predicaments that were preventing her from getting into powered mobility earlier, but they really wanted to work towards a goal of independent power mobility and trying to use that. This is not a correctable type of an orthopedic change. I mean, this is years of not just collapse, but also that rotational component that happens so often with a maximum degree of scoliosis that it becomes a rotoscoliosis. But it was really just a little bit has some really incredible benefits for a lot of consumers. And it might be something like respiration, breathing, swallowing. I've seen people have great outcomes with using small degrees of lateral tilt for really maximized benefits. And they actually had mocked this up. You can see her with a cushion and a wedge. They actually ended up doing a molded system where they wedged up and captured all the shape capture was all done in lateral tilt. And then they used that in a power lateral tilting system. So they were able to get a little bit of reorientation, and sometimes it's just a little bit of extra hand function, a little bit of, like I said, swallowing, easier respiration that can make all the difference in the world. So, and I know you've got a great example for James. So
this is James. James has spinal muscular atrophy, and again, I'll show you his video. I'll let it run while I'm talking here. You're going to see him tilt both directions. Okay, and it doesn't look like he's really moving, but for him, what he tells you is the internal shift of pressure is unbelievable for him. Okay, his organs, you can see how they're drifting to his left. For him, just going the opposite direction, just shifts some of the pressure. The other thing is he might move even just a millimeter, and that will change his relationship with the joystick. As you can see, he uses a micro extremity joystick with his hand in that very flexed position. He doesn't have any range in that arm. And then he uses his right hand, he uses that stylus to access his phone. And the funny thing is his friends were all calling him while we were setting the chair up. Hey, have you got your new system? He's a really likable guy. He's got tons of friends. He's out in the community. So he wanted to be as independent as he could possibly be. And he hates, he's one of these guys that I'm so sorry, I'm asking for a lot of things and I don't mean to be a bother. It's like, come on, James, you can ask for everything, tell us what you need. We're here to help you. So for him, again, just having that ability to shift his weight means he can stay in the chair a little bit longer. It means he doesn't have to ask someone to shift his position. He jokingly said when I first met him, he said, don't try and fix me, we're way past that. I am who I am. I'm in the position I am. That's not going to change. The only thing that we really had to do when we were adding the lateral tilt was consider his head position, because you could see, and I'm not sure if you could see it. I'm going to just run the video clip again. But right at the end of the position, you can see that headrest that comes laterally around his head just stops him from falling too far forward. So that's really the only thing that we did differently with this system versus his previous system. But it was really interesting. We were at the provider when we did the setup of this chair, and there were a couple of younger therapists because they were running a clinic out of that location. And they had never seen lateral tilt. They'd never seen it. So he was kind of the celebrity driving around from room to room, showing off his lateral tilt. But, he said, if I had to give up one, I'd give up the posterior anterior in order to get this lateral tilt, because it's so important for him and his function.
Yeah. And I know we're going to be crunched on time, but somebody just asked what was the funding source for that, but I put it in the chat box. I mean, I know we probably have done several dozen of these over the last few years for the US market. It's, and I've got some great suggestions about how you can go about trying this and funding it if you're asking for the US. Kathy's in Ontario.
Yeah, and unfortunately in Ontario, there is no funding for lateral tilt. There's funding for anterior posterior tilt. But he was able to get some funding through the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And he's one of 8 kids. And everybody chipped in a little bit to help fund the balance for him.
Oh, that's nice.
So, and he's got tons of friends. He's just he's a really cool dude. So there you go.
Yep.
So this last story, we're talking about all of this movement, and the ultimate in pressure redistribution is to stand. If you think about sitting on your pelvis, like we've been all day, it gets very uncomfortable, and we want to be able to move out of that position. So for our clients who have the ability to weight bear and to be in a standing position, again, that is the ultimate in pressure redistribution. So this is Serge, and Serge is he's kind of got it. He's actually a para. He's a T4 para. He left the facility just before COVID, and he went home in a manual chair, and he did some research, and he found, he was going back as an outpatient to do standing twice a week. And it was an hour and 15-minute drive for him to be able to do that. So he came to us and said, I think I can get some funding. He was in a motor vehicle accident. I want to be able to stand, and I need a powered chair. I'm realizing that I can't live my life in many places with just a manual chair. So pre-COVID, this is him in his initial, we're setting up a trial. We didn't know how it was going to be. We knew he'd been in a standing program, so we knew it was safe for him to stand. But this was our setup, and he was trying to see if it would fit in his house, if he could be functional in it, and what, was it worth the investment to be able to do this? Okay, and you'll see, we see a number of things happening. We saw his left hip start to drop, and we needed to look at the types of support that he needed to be able to stand. Now, unfortunately, COVID happened. The chair was delivered. I wasn't there for the delivery because, as you can imagine, they were very nervous about having people in their home during the COVID time. So we only just did the follow-up last week. And here he is in the follow-up video here. We kind of did the same video. And you can see one of the challenges has been for him is getting him in a better position, getting him more upright. He really hangs on the chest strap, and he's very sensitive through his chest. He was getting a lot of pain. So our plan is that we're going to do a custom posture flex belt that has padding built into it. But from a stability point of view, he's still more comfortable with an actual seat belt to hold him in. So again, what he said to me is, this has been a godsend because I've been able to stand when I couldn't have people in my home. I wouldn't have been able to do outpatient therapy because all of that has been canceled for the last almost 2 years. So he didn't have access to that. So if he hadn't had the stander, he would have lost 2 years. And if we look at him, I'm just trying to get to the next slide here. If you look at what's happened, I see him drifting left laterally a little bit. So I would like that belt to give him a little more support. And I want him to, I want to look at this kyphosis that's going on that he seems to have developed. You can see it when he's up and standing. So we're going to make some changes to this. So like I say, he's kind of a work in progress. But the main thing is he's been able to change his position because he's always looking forward. He's looking down at his computer. He's looking down at the TV. So he's gotten himself in a routine where he stands for 45 minutes every night. And he wouldn't have been able to do that without this. So again, it was one of those things. Was it basic and essential? No, that was deemed to be a manual chair, but this has certainly made a big change to his, development over the last 2 years. So just to wrap up, how do you choose what's best? There's tons out there. We've just thrown out all kinds of ideas. You need to look at the whole situation, the client, their abilities, their lifestyle, who's involved with them, and again, is something, are you overprescribing or is it unmanageable? Are you offering an opportunity for someone to have better function and a better quality of life? So on that note, Philippe was gonna.
Yeah, we don't have any questions for you guys so far. We had some comments that Stephanie already let you know. So amazing presentation, like always. You ladies rock. So just to finish, The CU code for this presentation is 71VC22. It's on the text box right now. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you, everybody.